Welcome to the Open Adoption Project. This is episode 105. We are the Nelsons. I'm Sean.
And I'm Lynette, and today we are really excited to be sharing an interview. Today we're talking with Kaira Dark, and she is a birth mom.
Yeah, I loved listening to this conversation, and we know that you'll enjoy what she has to share. For me, there's a lot of moments from this conversation that I really liked, and we hope that you like as well. But there's this turning moment where she realizes how adoption is a blessing.
Multifaceted.
Yeah, where it's not just about the experience she had, but she experiences it from the other side, and she says it's a moment of healing, and I love that. We're so grateful to Kaira for her sharing her experience as a birth mother and sharing with all of us things that we can learn as we navigate the adoption world.
Yeah, so let's jump into that interview with Kaira, and then we'll be back at the end and chat a little more. We are here on the podcast with Kaira Dark, and we are so excited to have her with us. Kaira, welcome.
Thank you. My name's Kaira Dark. I am a local resident of Utah and a realtor, and just like to stay as busy as I can. I do a lot of volunteering and community work, and that's kind of what I love to do.
That's awesome. All right, so we are really excited to hear about your connections with adoption and your experiences. Do you want to go ahead and share whatever you'd like to about your adoption story?
Sure. What I've learned in my life through this adoption story is that it's not a very typical one. Not that there is a typical one. I think everybody's story is super unique, but so I guess I'll start at 17. I was 17 years old. My brother was serving a mission in back east in the United States, and there was a missionary there, and his family wasn't supportive, so he wasn't receiving letters and things like this. And so my brother asked me if I'd be willing to just be supportive and send some letters. So I did. I started writing this missionary just as, an act of kindness, I guess. And we, 17-year-old girl, we fell in love in our letters. And so when he came home from his mission, we met quickly. We got engaged quickly. We got married quickly. It just was kind of a whirlwind. And without going into too much detail, what I'll say is from the time that we got married, it took about 3 months for things to really fall apart. I was barely 18 when we got married, like 10 days, barely 18. He was older, obviously 22, 23, something like this, but we were both still kids. And so again, without going into all the drama, it was not a healthy relationship. So there I was, 3 months married, and then I find out I'm pregnant, and completely unplanned, of course. And so it just quickly turned into, I can't raise this child. Like I said, 18 and not in a great mental health space myself. And I was concerned about trying to work with the father to raise that baby and what kind of quality of life my son would have and all these things. So I think it was about February when I finally made the decision that I was going to place the baby for adoption. So this would have been about 6 months into marriage. And so I started working with the agency, and back in the day, it wasn't looking at profiles online like you do now, is what I've heard. I haven't actually experienced this, but back in my day, I was handed like 13 paper profiles with interviews and letters to me and like pictures and their medical history and all of this. And it was kind of overwhelming. And so thank goodness for my mother, because I moved back in with my mom, and she and I sat and went through the profiles, and it was so overwhelming. And we're like, how do you qualify one family over another? How do you decide who's more deserving or worthy of a child than another one, So that was kind of a strange experience. But the first thing we did was, I kind of laugh at this. We filtered out anyone who didn't have a college education. because it was just kind of a quick and easy way to like par it down. But I laugh at it because I never graduated college. I mean, but that doesn't qualify you to be a parent. But like, how else do you filter it out? I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just kind of funny, the criteria that we were like, well, maybe we'll start here and maybe we'll try this. It was, I laugh at it now, but at the time it made sense. So I narrowed it down, ultimately selected a family, met them in March, in person, and then we continued communicating through letters that were sent through the agency. So it was very much a closed adoption to begin with. Everything had to be filtered through the agency. They would open everything to make sure there was no personal information. We didn't know last names, anything like that. And at the time, I don't recall there being different. This was almost 20 years ago. And, you know, I know open adoption was starting to become more common, but at the time that was the norm. It was just privacy was super important. So but we had great social workers that kept us in touch and made sure we got our communications with each other. So we were able to stay in touch. And his adopted mom asked me to keep a journal of my experience throughout the pregnancy. So I did, and I included pictures of my family. And I actually read that recently in preparation for this interview. It was kind of cool to look back on. But anyway, so then it was due date time. And again, I don't know how common this is, but at the time, with everything being closed and structured, the pregnancy was induced, or the delivery was induced. So I got to the hospital, got induced, went through the whole delivery, of course. And the thing that stands out to me about that experience, it was hard, but you know, he was born and I got to spend 2 days just loving on him and being so happy and getting to feed him and do all the things that I wasn't going to get to do. But the thing that stands out to me the most is the moment when I had to sign the papers that relinquished my rights, because I had him in my left arm and a pen in my right hand as I'm signing these rights away. And there's social workers and nurses and my mom, and I was still legally married, even though this divorce had been filed and everything. But because there was a child involved, they wanted to ensure the adoption took place before they granted a divorce without, you know, custody and parental rights. So I was still legally married, and my husband at the time was on the phone with my social worker to make sure I signed the papers so that he would also sign the papers. Like, it was the most, I don't have any other words for it, like controlling. I don't know. It was awful. It was just this really strange experience, and I didn't really get to having that dynamic going on kind of in the background made it all the more difficult.
Yeah, so it wasn't how you wanted it.
Not at all. Yeah, thank you for helping me find my words. Yeah, not at all how I wanted it, and very, very not public, but I felt exposed. I felt very exposed, and like if I wanted to change my mind all of a sudden, there was no way I could. Now I didn't. I knew the right thing for my baby, and I didn't want to change my mind, but there was that kind of pressure with all of that going on for sure. So then I gave the baby, you know, I got to be the one to place the baby in mom's arms and say my goodbyes and all of that. And then we stayed in touch at the time, and I haven't read up on laws lately, but at the time, adoption processes were 6 months before it was completed and like legally final. So for that 6 months, the agency still filtered our communications. They would send me pictures of how he was doing. And I mean, they were amazing. I got so lucky with the parents, because I mean, they would send me stacks an inch thick of pictures of every little thing, bath time and feeding time, and he's just sleeping. And it was amazing. I have photo albums from his first 2 years of life that I just got really, really fortunate. They even sent me DVDs with like videos of him having his first this or that. And so I got to be really, at least connected and see that he was okay and he was thriving, and all the love that he was surrounded by. fast forward, that went on for about 18 months. So when he was about 18 months old, I think it was at about actually the year mark that the agency stopped filtering the letters and we started emailing. So still no last names or anything, but we had email information. And so they emailed me when he was about 18 months old and asked if I'd be willing to meet just them for dinner. So we did. We met at Bombay House. It was their favorite place. So we met there for Indian food, and they brought it up to me that they felt strongly that if he grew up not only knowing that he was adopted, because they were very open with him about that. He had a photo of me pregnant with him on his nightstand, right? They were very open about where he was from, but they just had this strong feeling that by opening it up and removing the mystery, as they called it, of like where he's from, that taking away that fantasy and romanticizing that we do when there's these questions, it could only help him. And they said at the time, there wasn't a lot of research. We don't know what open adoption really looks like and how that affects these kids as they grow up. But it feels like the right thing to do for us if you're open to it. And of course I was like, yes, please. Absolutely. I would love that. So it only took a couple of weeks. We met at a park and I baked a little, summer cake because I wanted to, I don't know, it was something that I don't know. I felt the need to bring a treat. I don't know.
I love that. I bake to show love. I can see that if that was
right.
your
Like,
thought. Yeah.
It's like, okay, I want to bring something. So I had to like home bake a orange creamsicle cake or something. I don't remember, but showed up at the park and little guy was there playing and he knew who I was. He recognized me and came straight up to me. And it was just kind of remarkable that all that time later, and he, 18 months, so he obviously didn't remember me from the hospital, but they'd clearly been talking to him and showing pictures and all of that. So he knew exactly who I was and was very comfortable with me and let me hug him and everything. And since then, I've seen him 3 or 4 times a year, typically, if not more. We don't live very far apart, but enough that it's challenging. But I've celebrated every birthday with him since he was 2. He's a very accomplished musician. I've been to all of his concerts that I can. He's even come and stayed with me and my family now and he's come to family reunions on my side, and I've gotten to meet a lot of his extended family, and it's just completely open. And it's been that way now. He'll be 20 this year. And so it's been 18 years of open adoption. And I think it's truly been a blessing for both of us, but most specifically for him. So that's kind of the high level story of me being a birth mom.
Wow. That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. As you think about these experiences that you've had with openness, what would you want others to know who might be hesitant about open adoption based on your experiences?
Sure. Well, there's not a textbook on how to do it, right? And while it is more common now, and I haven't like dove into the research and the details, so I'm speaking only from my experience and not from like some educated space. But I guess what I would say is that it is a good thing. And I think that the child having the ability to understand themselves and ask questions about their life, and even just from like the medical history, like being able to have open dialogue about those things, I think is really important. But I think the thing that makes most people hesitant is, what if it doesn't work? Or what if the relationship doesn't vibe? Or what if birth mom expects too much? Or these kinds of things. And this is something we talked about, myself and my son's parents, early on, is we committed to just having really open dialogue and what's working and what's not. And my favorite thing that his mom ever said to me is like, listen, we can set boundaries, but the boundaries can change. Just because that's what we set now doesn't mean that's what it has to be forever. And I think that's something that's key for people to understand, is that, listen, you start one way and you try it. And if it's not working for either of you, you can make adjustments so that it works. But the key there is having that open dialogue and mutual respect, because I think the respect that each of us have had for each other's roles has also been a really big piece of why it's worked so well.
Wow, that is such amazing advice. I love all of that. And so the open communication, the respect, and recognizing that boundaries can change.
Absolutely.
I think that's so wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, how do you think these experiences that you've had as a birth mom have really shaped your life?
Wow. So much. I think early on, if you put this into perspective, I went in my year from 18 to 19, I got married, was in an abusive relationship, got divorced, had a child, gave that child up, all before I was 19 years old. So that trauma really shaped my early 20s. I was lost. It was just a painful, painful time in my life. And not just because I had given up a child. That obviously was very painful, but I knew it was the right thing. I never for a second doubted or questioned what my choice was. But I think I let the trauma define me a lot for those first few years. And I really, really struggled. Mother's Day was always awful. I would just cry and cry. And it's like I would get offended if people in my family didn't acknowledge me on Mother's Day. But then at the same time, I didn't want to be recognized on Mother's Day. And so it was just this very confusing, difficult time that unfortunately led to me making even more not awesome decisions in my early adulthood. That led to more difficulty throughout my adult life. And it took me a really long time. I mean, I think it took me about 10 years to really find myself and find confidence in who I was. And, one of the things that I read in my journal that I had made for my son is that he gave me purpose. And he was the first time that this experience with him was the first time I felt important in the world.
Mm.
And so there was this piece of that, like, if he's my purpose and that's what's important, what is left, right? And so, thankfully I had an amazing relationship with them and was able to be a part of his life. And so it helped kind of keep me going and keep me, feeling important in his life. And I had a great support system around me, but that experience, I mean, all of it, but specifically giving up a child, I think, that's a trauma that I don't really know how to describe, but it definitely set the stage for a rough, early adulthood for me.
So challenging. So, were there support systems that helped? Like, was there any counseling offered from the agency after placement or anything like that? Like,
No, that was really interesting, is that as soon as the baby was placed, the agency essentially would just get the mail to me.
wow.
There were no check-ins, there was no counseling. I think 6 weeks after I maybe heard from my social worker to check in on me, but other than that, it was up to me. And thankfully,
Wow.
I was with my mom, and she was very supportive and made sure that I was getting help and had people to talk to. And I wasn't always receptive to it, but I generally would kind of lean on that counseling.
Yeah.
But it was entirely up to us to find. And, there weren't, that I'm aware of, there weren't like groups. And as a birth mom, something I've observed in recent months is, as a birth mom, there's not a lot out there. There's a lot, not a lot. There's a little more for adopted parents and for adoptees.
Mhm.
But for birth moms, and I don't know if it's because most birth moms choose to stay private and they don't want to share that very intimate thing about themselves. I'm not sure, but
Mhm.
there's just not a lot of resources out there on surviving after placing a child. So yeah, it was pretty much up to me and my mom.
Oh, yeah, that's really too bad. I feel like a theme that comes up on our podcast pretty often is that secrecy and stigma build into shame, and these cycles of shame are so hard to shake. And it sounds like that lack of support is really just feeding into that. I hope things are better for people placing now, but that's hard.
Yeah, and I agree. I think there is still a stigma because you got to remember it wasn't that long ago that girls that found themselves pregnant were shipped off to live somewhere else to have the baby in private so they didn't bring shame to the family. I mean, what was that, 40, 50 years ago? And
Yeah,
even though that seems like a while, it's not that long ago.
yeah.
And so I think the stigma is still really, really strong.
Mm.
And I think our society is ready to handle it, but I don't know how many of us are comfortable being that vulnerable
Yeah,
and setting ourselves up to be shamed, you know?
yeah, yeah, that is a really vulnerable place to be. So another thing that struck me was your hospital experience where you had these couple of days where you were able to like feed baby and take care of your son and bond with him, but then signing papers, it wasn't really on your terms at all.
Yeah.
And so looking back, how could people have better advocated for you? What do you think could have changed? Like, how could that have been a better experience? What do you think?
Well, yeah, that's, and I haven't really spent a lot of time reflecting on that, but I carried a lot of anger about that because once I educated myself and understood that I could have advocated for myself more and said, no, I'm not doing it like this.
Yeah.
And my sweet mom didn't know either. We just were doing what we were told. I wish the social worker would have advocated for me more because certainly the social worker had to have known that it didn't have to be like that.
Yeah.
I didn't have to have my ex-husband on the other end of the phone waiting to make sure that I had done my part. And so I guess I kind of, and even the social worker on the other side, I know
Yeah.
they were aware of the situation. And I guess I just wish that the people that were
Mm.
informed and there to be supportive had a little more compassion for what I was doing
Yeah.
and ensuring to create a safe space for me to do that. And I wish I had educated myself more. Um, I think we often rely on others in their profession to take care of us, but at the end of the day, it's up to us as well. And so I wish I had done more research throughout the pregnancy of what was or wasn't allowed or okay, or like what my rights were
Mhm.
as a birth mom in that moment when I'm actually giving up my rights. You know what I mean? But um yeah, and I don't know if this is possible, but it almost seems like an appropriate time to have a neutral, almost a mediator, but
Yeah.
specific to one that's very informed about these situations,
Yeah.
but almost a third party that's not representing any one person, but just making sure everybody's okay,
Yeah. I
because
think that's such a good idea. And like not
yeah,
representing an agency or yeah, anything. Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
And even considering, I was angry for a really long time. I've been able to get over that now. But so now with my hindsight eyes, I can even imagine my ex-husband, how hard that was for him. And that probably wasn't a healthy thing for him to be sitting there on the other end of the line either. So really it wasn't good for any of us. And it would have been nice to have an objective perspective to kind of facilitate a healthier, more peaceful experience in such a non-peaceful and difficult time.
Yeah. Well, and it also sounds like it could have been a lot more beneficial if things had been offered afterward as well, like post-placement counseling and therapy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hmm. So you and your son's adoptive parents met when he was like 18 months old and talked about opening things up. And
Yes.
so it sounds like you had a really healthy conversation about what that would look like at that point. Do you have any tips or advice on how to have those conversations?
Well, like I said, I kind of hit the jackpot. I got really lucky with two very down to earth and honest and communicative people. Um, so I think the thing that has worked really well, and specifically for me, is I think through other stories I've heard, a lot of times I think families, adopted parents, want to kind of bend over backwards for the birth mom. And I never felt that way from them. It felt very, what is the word I'm thinking of?
Like natural, or
Yeah, it felt very natural, and it didn't feel forced, and it didn't, it was very clear that this is something we're doing for him.
mm,
And so at any point, if it's not working for him, we're going to make adjustments. And I think that's the perspective going into these conversations that you need to have, is that this is for a benefit of the child. This is so that the child can have that understanding of who they are, where they're from, a stronger sense of identity and all of those things. There's not really room for our own egos and our own agendas. It's got to come from a place, a truly paternal, like parent place, not paternal, but parental place of doing the right thing for the kid. Yeah, I think that would be the number one tip, would be to just really, really come from the perspective of doing the right thing for the child.
oh, I love that so much. I think that could solve so many problems in adoption if we just keep
Right?
our focus on the children. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I've heard a lot of stories of birth moms that get involved and they can't separate the emotional side of it, which I completely relate to, but got to keep the kiddos up front of mind, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. So, in your experience, do you feel like when things opened up with your adoption, did that affect your healing at all, or that experience you were really struggling with trauma and post-placement feelings, did that influence it, do you think?
I do think it helped. I remember that for the first couple of years when I started spending more time with him and his family, it was like simultaneously therapeutic and healing to be there and to see him. I was very unsure of my place and how to act at first, but I got more comfortable. But it was always like when I was driving away and I would just kind of cry, and it wasn't like a breakdown or anything. It was just kind of like just really heavy. And so it was emotional, but I think in a good way. I do think it helped me heal, and it certainly helped to see him thriving and surrounded by such incredible people, learning such amazing things. And you could just feel the love in the home. And yeah, so I do think that it helped in my healing process for sure.
Cool. But it was also challenging because maybe
Yeah, it
that
was.
makes sense. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was challenging, but if I try to imagine having not been involved in his life, I think it would have been harder, because then it's the same thing. It's the mystery of, is he okay? What's he up to? What is he like? What's his favorite color? All these things.
Yeah.
But I knew all of that. I knew he was okay. So the pain was coming from, that was a really hard thing I just did. And it takes a few years to recover from something like that. But I do think it absolutely helped me heal more than it didn't, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. So, thinking about the adoption community at large, what do you think some of the biggest challenges we're facing as a community are?
Yeah, this is something I've just kind of recently been diving into. I've kind of had my story, and I have a brother who adopted a child, and so I've kind of had it in my life, but I haven't immersed myself in the community until recently. And so what I've been discovering, and again, this is not coming from an educated space at all, just my observations, is it does seem like resources are lacking for all parties involved. It doesn't seem like there's a ton of research. There's some literature that you can pick up and read. There's a few groups around, but largely it feels like the adoption community has kind of been left up to themselves to figure it out.
Mhm.
I don't see, we have an organization up here that is it's a nonprofit organization, and it's an amazing organization, but they do a lot of free parenting classes, for example, and free counseling and education for blending families and step families and how that looks. And I've actually asked them, why don't you also have resources like this for families that have adoption in their story? Because it's very unique. It's different from blending families. It's different from step families. It's very different. And the dynamics and the issues that adoptee children deal with is different. And it's kind of like it didn't occur to them. And they were like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. I don't know. Maybe we'll look into that. And so to me, it's kind of like forgotten. It's almost like it just doesn't, nobody really knows what to do with it. So nothing happens. And I see that shifting. I can see that there are more efforts, but it's almost like no one's quite sure what needs to happen. So I think the biggest challenge is again, just opening the dialogue and starting somewhere instead of leaving it up to individuals to rally and try to make something good happen.
Wow, I love that. So do you have any thoughts? What do you think would be a good place to start?
Well, I've heard a lot. I actually spoke with a few birth mother organizations, and apparently there's a lot of anger that kind of hangs out in these birth mom groups. And I think when you get a bunch of angry people together to try to support each other, it turns toxic really fast. And a lot of the anger is towards the agencies. Why didn't the agency do more for me? But I have kind of a maybe unpopular opinion on that, because in my mind, the agency's job is to make sure the child finds a family and is placed there safely. That's their job. So when they've placed that child, it makes sense to me that they kind of go on to the next. We have another baby we've got to find a home for, right? So yes, would it be lovely if the agency would also provide some services for their birth moms, because that's important too. Yes, that's lovely, but that's not their wheelhouse. That's not their skill set. It's almost like there needs to be some power referral program going on where agencies go, okay, thank you so much. You've done your part. We need to move on to the next, but this is where you go next. And some place where birth moms can find some support. And it doesn't matter if they're insured and if they can afford it, but almost a birth mom, I don't know if you'd call it an agency or whatever, but some group where there can be recovery support and counseling and these things with people who are experienced and experts in that. Because again, the agencies are experts in the adopted families, right?
Yeah.
I think to me that seems like an obvious one, but I don't really know how you make that happen. Again, this all requires money and resources, and there's not endless amounts of that. But as far as for adoptees and adopted families, I'm not as familiar with resources out there for that. I think there are a few more, but still lots of room for improvement.
So how do you think your perceptions of adoption have changed over time? I feel like you've alluded to this a little bit. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah. In the beginning, it kind of felt like that was my only choice. It was either keep this baby and he's going to have a terrible life because it was just not terrible, but it was going to be hard, or give him a family that's going to give him everything that he deserves, right? And I didn't really have an opinion of adoption. It just kind of was what I needed to do. And then for the first few years after, I was pretty angry, and not specifically at any one person. It was just, I think, how we deal with grief sometimes. And so I would target it at different places, and sometimes it was the agency, but not always. But for me, there's a very specific moment, and I actually wrote a story about this a long time ago that I gave to my brother. So my brother and sister-in-law they tried for 5 years, couldn't have babies, so they decided to adopt. And I could spend a whole other episode with you talking about all of the amazing coincidental connections that happened in my adoption story that make it like divine intervention that this happened. Like it's crazy, but I won't. The only thing I will say is that my son's parents were on a panel for parents that were getting ready to adopt, and my brother happened to sit on that panel. And as they told their story, they made the connection that it was me. And so they got to meet each other. And so that was really, really neat that they made that connection. And of course they were super respectful, like talked to them privately and were like, I think who you're talking about is my sister. Like, anyway, so through their story or their journey, they ended up getting a baby that was 5 months old and out of state. And so they had to go fly to that place to bring the baby home. And we were all there at the airport with our signs welcoming the baby, and they came walking down the exit, whatever, with their little bundle. And I broke down then. They handed me the baby and I just held her and cried. But that was the moment I healed because I saw the miracle from the other side. Mm-hmm. I got to be firsthand witness to this beautiful couple who was so desperately wanted to have a family and couldn't. And the miracle that she brought into not just their lives, but all of us. And I can't imagine my life without my niece, right? And all of the memories that we have, and it's like she was meant to be a part of our family. And that was the moment that I realized, I guess I stopped thinking about it from the perspective of what I lost and started thinking about it from what everyone else gained. And so I think that was kind of a pivotal moment as far as like how my perception has shifted, is that it went from kind of like it was a necessity, I had no other choice, to like, no, this is actually a really beautiful thing and should be celebrated and should not be a secret, because everybody that's involved are wonderful people that have to set themselves aside to do something kind of miraculous.
Wow, that is so beautiful.
This was really, really great. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much. I have loved hearing from you.
Thank you so much.
Well, we want to give a huge thanks to Kaira again for her willingness to share her experience and her story. And obviously everyone's story is unique, but I think I learned a lot of great things from her.
Yeah, I really enjoyed speaking with her. She was really focused on adoptee experiences, and I thought that was really beautiful, just hearing her talk about how she keeps her son at the center of these decisions she makes, which is really our goal with open adoption. And so I really appreciated that.
Yeah, and kudos to the adoptive parents of this baby, right, who reached out and established this relationship and connection while he was still yet pretty young. I loved when she shared that they went to the park and he ran up to her and he already knew who she was, even though they hadn't met since, delivery. But this adoptive family had fostered a conversation in their home about his birth mother that was loving and helped him know of his origins and his connection to her. I love that.
I love that too. I do think that there's a part of every child that's going to remember their birth parents, right? And especially their birth mom. But yeah, I thought that was a really beautiful example of how these adoptive parents were making sure to speak kindly and often, and just really incorporating their child's birth mom into their home and family.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like when adoption is done right, it should really feel like our circle and our family is growing, right? And so it's not like a change of your family and your circle, but it's like it grows.
An expansion.
Yeah, it's not like it shifts, it just grows. Yeah.
I also really loved, and I mentioned this in the very beginning, but I also loved the moment where she is holding her now adopted niece and has this realization, like, she's always been part of our family or belonged to our family. And for her, she said that was a moment of healing, experiencing it from the other side, where she had placed the baby in a home and had hoped for the best for his circumstance. And she couldn't really feel that or know that from her perspective. But then, yeah, just hearing how she articulated that, it helped her feel like, I guess, more holistic about the experience.
Yeah, that was really beautiful. Yeah, adoption is so complicated, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's so complex. There's so many struggles and so many challenges. And there's also beauty in it, but there's also pain and there's trauma. And it's just so deeply complex. And I feel like it's a challenge, right? To make sure that we're acknowledging these hard parts, but we also want to acknowledge the beautiful parts. And it's a challenge, right? Like, and it gets easier as an adoptee grows older. They can let you know what they're feeling and what want to focus on. But
yeah, actually, it reminds me of a personal experience that we had just this week, where we were traveling as a family, and we were in the area of our youngest child's biological grandma, his birth father's mother, and we knew that we would be close to her home, and so we reached out and found out a time to meet, and we're able to meet her for the first time. And it's been 4 years since he was adopted, and we've had a little connection with social media.
Yeah, social media makes things so nice.
And we have like a group chat that has tons of extended family of his in it. But just to see this little connection between him and his biological grandma was really, really sweet. And there were aspects of that interaction that were just really natural and just genuine. And it was so sweet to see. And as I was sitting there on the couch watching them kind of play with each other, this idea of, his circle getting bigger or expanding, the amount of people loving him and doting on him, and not just him, our other kids too felt this love from her. It was just really sweet.
And I think it was also cool for our older kids to be able to see that connection as well with a biological family member who we hadn't met in person yet.
Yeah.
But see that tangible connection, and there's something special about it. And so I thought that was really neat to be able to celebrate that all together.
Well, and I thought it was interesting too. One of like the natural consequences of this was we feel more connection and love with her. And, I think we'd been gone an hour when she sent a text and said, "Hey, can you remind me of the birth dates of the other kids too? I want to make sure that I send them little birthday presents as well." And so it was just this really awesome, witness that we're this big eclectic family, and we support each other, and all of us are connected to each other, even though there's
different biological ties, different legal ties, but it's still, we're all connected.
It's just really beautiful.
I love that. That was a really neat experience.
Well, friends, thanks so much for listening to this episode. Again, to Kaira, we're really grateful for her sharing her story. So grateful for you as our listeners. We love being a part of this community. One thing that Kaira mentioned was that she still feels like, there's not a lot of research done in the adoption community or about open adoption, and that sometimes we're kind of left alone to figure it out. And we hope that we can be a resource and a help to those that feel that way. And we're going to do what we can do as a couple, as an organization, to dive deeper and learn more. Lynette doing her PhD, researching, and we'll share some of the things that she learns. And we're just grateful to be part of this community and hope that we can add to your experience.